She was erased from the guest list, humiliated in front of the city's elite. But what they didn't know was that her billionaire husband was about to make them regret it forever. Danielle had always been the kind of woman who noticed small details. She loved order, neatness, and things making sense. That was why when the invitation for the charity gala arrived, she sat at the kitchen table and carefully looked at every word printed in gold. The envelope had both her name and her husband Marcus's name on it. But when she unfolded the stiff white card inside, her stomach sank. Only Marcus's name was printed on the guest list section. Hers was missing, as though she had never existed. At first she thought it must be a mistake. Maybe the printer had left her out by accident, or maybe the organizers had sent a half-finished version. She even smiled for a moment, shaking her head at how clumsy rich event planners could sometimes be. But then a little voice inside her whispered, "What if it isn't an accident?" That voice refused to be quiet, no matter how many times. She told herself she was imagining things. Danielle and Marcus had gone to this gala every year for the last 7 years. It was one of the biggest events in their city, filled with politicians, CEOs, celebrities, and powerful people who wanted to be seen. The gala raised money for children's hospitals, and Marcus had always been one of the largest donors. Danielle never minded the attention that came with it. She enjoyed seeing people come together for a good cause, and she worked hard every year to volunteer behind the scenes. She had stuffed envelopes, visited sick children, and even helped decorate the hall once. To her, the gala was more than just a glamorous night. It was something she felt proud to be part of. So when she looked down at the elegant paper and saw her name missing, the pride she once felt turned into a quiet shame. She imagined walking into the ballroom and being stopped at the door, people staring as if she didn't belong. She imagined the whispers, the glances, the fake smiles. It was only a name on paper, but it felt like a heavy stone pressing on her chest. Marcus was in his office when she went to show him. He was on a video call, speaking firmly about some business deal. She didn't want to interrupt, so she placed the card on his desk and waited until he was done. He looked tired but happy when he turned to her, stretching his arms. "What's this?" he asked, picking up the invitation. Danielle forced a smile. "Look at it closely," she said. He scanned the card. It took him only a few seconds to notice. His forehead tightened. "Why isn't your name here?" he asked, his voice sharper now. "That's what I was wondering," Danielle said softly. "Maybe it's a mistake." What? Marcus leaned back in his chair, holding the card between his fingers. His eyes narrowed, and Danielle could tell he wasn't thinking it was a mistake at all. He had been in the business world long enough to know when something was deliberate. Still, Danielle didn't want to jump to conclusions. "Maybe we should call them and check," she suggested. Marcus nodded, but she could tell he was already suspicious. He had seen the way people treated her sometimes. Danielle was a black woman married to one of the richest men in the city. Most people were polite, even kind to her. But every now and then, she noticed the little slights. The way someone would assume she was Marcus's assistant. The way some women would ignore her in conversations and only speak to Marcus. The way people looked surprised when they learned she was highly educated. With a successful career before she chose to focus on philanthropy, those moments hurt. But Danielle had learned to carry herself with grace. She didn't like to make scenes or hold grudges. But the missing name, it felt worse than all those little slights. It was official. It was public. It was them saying she didn't matter. Enough to be acknowledged. That evening, Danielle called the charity office. A cheerful-sounding woman picked up. Danielle explained about the missing name, trying to keep her tone light. "Oh yes," the woman said after a pause. "We had some adjustments this year. The guest list is a bit tighter." Danielle frowned. "But Marcus and I have always attended. Together, I volunteer for the charity as well. Surely my name should be included." The woman hesitated. "Well, we do value your support, Mrs. Carter. It's just that this year seating arrangements are more formal. We've focused on primary donors and board members." Danielle's hand tightened around the phone. "I've been a donor for years. I've been there every single year. Why would my name be removed?" The woman coughed lightly. "I don't make those decisions. I only work in administration. But I assure you, you're welcome to attend with Mr. Carter. It's just that your name isn't officially listed. I'm sure it's nothing personal. Nothing personal. The words echoed in Danielle's mind long after she hung up. How could it not be personal when her identity had been erased so casually? She sat at the table, staring at the phone, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. When Marcus came out of his office, she told him everything. He listened silently, his jaw tightening with every word. They said what? He asked finally. They said, I can attend with you, Danielle repeated. But my name won't be on the list. Like I'm just your plus one. Marcus slammed the invitation card on the table. Unbelievable. You've done more for that charity than half the people who sit on their board, and they think they can treat you like this. Danielle placed her hand on his arm. Please don't get angry. Maybe it's just one person's decision. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. But Marcus shook his head. No, this is a big deal. They know exactly what they're doing. They think they can insult you because they think you'll stay quiet. They don't know you, and they don't know me. Danielle looked at him, feeling both comforted and worried. She didn't want Marcus to cause a scandal, but she also didn't want to keep swallowing disrespect. For years, she had told herself, to rise above it, to take the high road. But this time it felt different. It felt like a line had been crossed. That night, Danielle lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the other women who would be at the gala, their glittering gowns, their smiles. She thought about the people who would look at her and wonder why she wasn't listed. She thought about the way society often tried to make women like her invisible. And then she thought about Marcus, how fiercely he had defended her, how his eyes had burned with anger on her behalf. She realized this wasn't just about her name, missing from a card. It was about respect, dignity, and the quiet battles she had fought her whole life. She turned on her side and whispered to herself. This time, they went too far. The night of the gala finally came, and Danielle felt her chest tighten as she stood in front of the mirror. She wore a stunning black gown with silver details. One Marcus had chosen for her weeks earlier when they thought the night would be. Just like every other year, her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup soft and elegant. She looked like she belonged in any ballroom, but her heart still carried the sting of the missing name. Marcus came in, adjusting his cufflinks. He stopped when he saw her, his face softening into a smile. You look incredible, he said, walking over to kiss her cheek. Danielle smiled faintly. I hope they think so too. They don't get to decide if you belong, Marcus said firmly. You're walking in with me, and that's all that matters. They left the house together, sliding into the sleek black car waiting for them. The ride to the gala was quiet. Danielle stared out the window at the city lights flashing by, remembering all the previous years she had looked forward to this night. Back then, she had been excited to see old friends, to talk about causes she cared about, to feel part of something bigger. But tonight, the air felt heavy. She wasn't sure if she was walking into celebration or humiliation. When they arrived, the hotel hosting the gala was glowing.
Ow.
A long red carpet stretched to the entrance, with photographers snapping pictures of guests in sparkling gowns and sharp tuxedos. The air buzzed with chatter and laughter. Danielle held Marcus's arm tightly as they walked forward. She could already feel eyes on them. Some people smiled warmly, others looked curious, and a few wore that polite mask Danielle knew too well, the kind of smile that hid judgment at the entrance. A woman with a clipboard greeted Marcus. Mr. Carter, welcome back, she said, brightly. Her eyes shifted quickly to Danielle, then back to the clipboard. Her smile faltered just a little. And, your guest? Danielle's stomach dropped. There it was, the moment she had feared. She kept her face calm, her back straight, but her heart was pounding. Marcus's expression hardened instantly. This is my wife Danielle, he said, his voice sharp enough to slice the air. She doesn't need to be introduced like a stranger. The woman flushed red and stammered. Oh, of course, my apologies. It's just that her name isn't. I don't. She shuffled her papers nervously, pretending to look again, though everyone knew the truth. Danielle's name wasn't there. People in line behind them were starting to watch, whispering to each other. Danielle could feel their eyes burning into her. She wanted to disappear, but she stood tall, refusing to show the shame clawing at her chest. The woman finally said, She can go in as your +1, Mr. Carter. That won't be a problem. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. She is not my +1. She is Danielle Carter. She belongs here as much as anyone else, more than some, considering how much she's done for this cause. The woman nodded quickly, her cheeks still flushed. Yes, of course. Please, go right in. Marcus took Danielle's hand, and together they walked past the entrance into the grand ballroom. The chandeliers sparkled above them, the music played softly, and the smell of expensive perfume filled the air. But for Danielle, the magic of the room was gone. The humiliation had already happened. As they moved through the crowd, Danielle could hear fragments of conversations. Some people whispered, "Did you see? They didn't have her name." Others looked at her with sympathetic eyes, while a few smirked, as if enjoying her embarrassment. She tried to ignore it, lifting her chin higher. But inside she felt small. At their table, Marcus pulled out her chair with deliberate care, making sure everyone saw that he respected her. Danielle sat gracefully, even though her hands trembled. Slightly in her lap, a woman in a glittering blue gown leaned over from the next table. "Oh, Danielle," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I guess there was a little mix-up with the list. These things happen, you know. I'm sure it wasn't personal." Danielle smiled politely, though the words stung. It was always not personal, yet somehow it always happened to people like her. Another man at the table chuckled. "At least they let you in. Sometimes these events are just too crowded. Honestly, they should limit the spouses. It's not like everyone needs to be listed." Danielle's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. She knew that if she spoke, her anger would show, and she refused to give them that satisfaction.
Marcus.
However, leaned forward, his voice calm but sharp. "My wife isn't just a spouse. She has contributed more hours and more resources to this charity than most of the people here. Without her, half the things you enjoyed tonight wouldn't even exist." The man blinked, clearly embarrassed, and looked away. Danielle felt a rush of gratitude for Marcus, though her chest still ached. As the evening went on, the speeches began. The host stood on stage thanking the major donors. Marcus's name was mentioned, of course, but Danielle noticed how the speaker never once acknowledged her. Every time her husband's name was praised, she felt invisible beside him, like a shadow instead of a partner. She thought about the long hours she had spent at the hospital reading to children, the nights she had helped plan fundraisers, the money she and Marcus had donated together. All of that had been erased with a single missing name. She kept her smile fixed, clapping politely with everyone else, but inside, she was boiling. She remembered the woman at the office saying it was nothing personal, yet here she was, sitting in a room full of people who acted like she was just Marcus's +1 by the end of the dinner. Danielle had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let this break her spirit. She was angry, yes, but she also felt a new kind of strength rising inside her. They wanted her to feel small, but she would not give them that power. When Marcus leaned close and whispered, "You okay?" She nodded, squeezing his hand. "I'm okay," she said softly, though what she meant was, "I will be okay." She knew Marcus was already planning something. She could see it in his eyes, the way they hardened whenever someone looked at her with pity, the way his jaw clenched during the speeches. He wasn't the kind of man to let things slide. Not when it came to her. Danielle didn't know exactly what he was going to do. But she knew one thing for certain. The people who had erased her name were going to regret it. And for the first time that evening, that thought made her smile. Not the polite smile she had worn all night, but a real one, hidden behind her glass of wine. After the gala, Marcus could not stop thinking about what had happened. On the ride home, he held Danielle's hand the whole time. She didn't say much, only stared out the window with a calm face, but he knew her heart was heavy. He had been married to her long enough to see through her silence. Danielle was the type of woman who kept her pain quiet, who smiled even when she was hurt, but Marcus hated that she had to carry it at all. That night, after she went to bed, Marcus stayed, awake in his study. The gala invitation lay on his desk, the card with his name printed boldly, and hers missing completely. He stared at it for a long time, feeling anger burn deep inside him. Could buy 10 of those charities if he wanted to. He'd fund 10 more galas, bigger and better. Yet these people thought they could erase his wife like she was nothing. That was not going to stand. He started by making phone calls. It was almost midnight, but time zones worked in his favor. Some of his business partners were still awake in London, Dubai, and New York. He spoke to them in calm tones, but his words carried weight. He asked them about the charity, about who was on the board, about who made the decisions. Slowly, a picture began to form. By the end of the week. Marcus had discovered the truth. One of the lead organizers, a woman named Eleanor Grant, had been behind the guest list change. She was wealthy, old money, someone who liked to control the image of the gala. She wanted it to look polished, exclusive, and refined. And in her narrow vision, Danielle did not fit the picture. Eleanor had always been polite in public, but Marcus remembered the way she sometimes looked at Danielle with a faint smirk, as if judging her silently. Now it all made sense. Marcus didn't tell Danielle everything right away. He knew she was already hurt, and he didn't want to add to her pain until he had a plan. But he promised himself one thing. He would make sure Eleanor and her friends regretted what they had done. Instead of confronting them directly, Marcus moved quietly. Had learned long ago that real power was not about shouting or making threats. It was about influence. So he started calling fellow donors, one by one. These were men and women who respected Marcus, not just because of his money, but because he kept his word and always gave more than expected. He told them about what had happened to Danielle. It's not with anger, but with calm honesty, explained. How her name had been erased. How she had been treated like an afterthought. Some donors were shocked. Some admitted they had seen similar behavior in the past, but never spoke up. And many of them, moved by Marcus's story, promised to stand with him. Slowly, support began shifting. Donations that usually went to the gala started moving elsewhere. Marcus redirected millions toward rival organizations, ones that welcomed Danielle with open arms, ones that cared more about the cause than about appearances. Hospitals, schools, and shelters began receiving surprise funding. While the gala's own accounts quietly grew thinner, Danielle noticed the phone calls, the meetings, the late nights. One evening she asked him, "Marcus, what are you doing?" He smiled, reaching for her hand. "I'm making sure you get the respect you deserve," she sighed. "You don't have to fight this battle for me." He looked at her with steady eyes. "I'm not fighting it for you. I'm fighting it with you. They tried to erase you, Danielle. If I let that pass, then what kind of husband would I be?" Her eyes softened, and for the first time since the gala, she felt a spark of hope. Weeks passed, and whispers began to spread in the city's social circles. People noticed Marcus and Danielle were missing from certain meetings. They noticed checks that used to flow into the gala's accounts were now going elsewhere. Eleanor tried to cover it up, telling people that Marcus was simply busy. But others weren't convinced. One night, Danielle and Marcus were invited to a smaller charity dinner hosted by a different group. When they arrived, the room lit up. People came forward to greet Danielle warmly, shaking her hand, praising her past work. Unlike the cold stares at the gala, these were genuine smiles. Danielle felt her heart lift as she realized not everyone was like Eleanor. Some people truly valued her. Later, a close friend pulled her aside. "Danielle, do you know the gala board is panicking? Half their biggest donors are pulling back. No one knows why." Danielle smiled faintly, glancing across the room at Marcus, who was deep in conversation. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. That night when they got home, she asked him directly, "Marcus, are you the reason they're losing donors?" He leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Let's just say I prefer to invest in people who respect my wife." Danielle shook her head, half laughing. "You're unbelievable." "No," he said, standing and wrapping his arms around her. "You are unbelievable. I won't let anyone forget it." His plan wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no public fights, no angry letters. But little by little, the gala organizers felt the ground shifting beneath them. The phone stopped ringing with donor pledges. Sponsors poured out. Some board members began questioning Eleanor's decisions. Eleanor herself grew nervous. Sensed that Marcus was behind it, though she had no proof. She tried sending polite notes to Danielle, hoping to see her soon, pretending as though nothing had happened. Danielle ignored them. Instead, Danielle spent her time focusing on the charities that truly welcomed her. She visited hospitals, helped organize fundraisers, and sat on panels where her voice was not only heard, but respected. Every time she did, she felt her strength return. The more she rose in those spaces, the weaker Eleanor's grip on the gala became. People began whispering that the gala was outdated, that it only cared about image, while Marcus and Danielle were building real change elsewhere. Marcus didn't stop there. He quietly arranged meetings with journalists, giving them hints about where the money was going and why. He never named names, but he painted a clear picture. Some organizations cared about people, while others cared only about appearances. The press began to ask questions. Articles started to appear, pointing out how certain charities seemed less inclusive than others. Danielle watched it all unfold with mixed feelings. Part of her felt satisfied that justice was being served. Another part of her felt sad that it had to happen this way. She had once loved the gala, loved what it stood for. But now she saw the truth. It had never been about the cause, not really. It had been about power, about image, about keeping certain people in and others out. One evening, sitting on the porch with Marcus as the sun set, Danielle spoke her heart. "I don't want revenge, Marcus. I just want respect. I want to walk into a room and be seen for who I am, not erased because of who I'm not." Marcus squeezed her hand. "That's exactly why I'm doing this. Because you deserve better. And because the world needs to learn that they can't erase people like you anymore." Danielle leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his words. For the first time since the night of the gala, she felt truly at peace. She didn't know exactly how things would end. But she knew one thing: the people who had erased her name were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The next year's gala approached, and this time the air around it felt different. The organizers had worked hard to make everything perfect. More decorations, more lights, even a bigger guest list. They hoped that by improving the event, people would forget last year's misstep. But despite their efforts, the tension was thick. Marcus and Danielle's absence was being noticed. People whispered as invitations were handed out. Some of the city's most influential donors had declined, citing scheduling conflicts or other priorities. The gala's usual glittering crowd was smaller than expected, and a sense of unease ran through the organizers' offices. Eleanor Grant, the woman who had erased Danielle's name the previous year, paced nervously in her office. She had always prided herself on control, on creating the perfect image of the gala. But now, she realized she had underestimated Marcus Carter. The quiet power of a billionaire, combined with the dignity of a woman who refused to be invisible, had begun to reshape the social circles she thought she owned. Calls from important donors were going unanswered, and some board members were openly questioning her decisions. She could feel the walls closing in, though she tried to hide it with her usual composed smile. Danielle, meanwhile, felt a sense of calm. She had spent the past months pouring her energy into organizations that welcomed her. Children's hospitals, local schools, and new nonprofit programs had all received her support. She was busy, fulfilled, and surrounded by people who valued her. Unlike the gala's empty promises, these spaces made her feel important, seen, and appreciated. She had learned that respect was more powerful than appearances, and she carried that knowledge proudly. Marcus, as always, was at her side. Together, they had quietly built networks of support. Donations flowed to organizations that aligned with their values, and with each passing day, the gala's influence weakened. Marcus had met with journalists and philanthropists discreetly, planting seeds of curiosity and truth. Articles began appearing in newspapers and online publications, hinting at the gala's elitist tendencies and lack of inclusivity. The word spread. Marcus and Danielle had chosen to support places that truly cared, and their absence at the gala spoke volumes. The night of the event arrived, and the gala hall glittered under chandeliers. Guests arrived in sparkling gowns and tuxedos, cameras flashing, champagne flowing. But amidst the grandeur, there was an undercurrent of anxiety. Organizers whispered nervously, glancing around for familiar faces. Marcus and Danielle were not among them, and their absence was being noticed more than anyone had expected. Journalists and attendees alike began murmuring. "Where is Danielle Carter?" some asked. "And Marcus?" Others shared stories of their charitable contributions, emphasizing how they had shifted their support to other causes. The whispers spread like wildfire. People began to realize that the gala's image of perfection was cracking under the weight of truth. Inside the ballroom, Eleanor tried to maintain her composure. She greeted arriving guests with her usual smile, though her hands shook slightly. She gave speeches about the gala's achievements, hoping to distract from the growing concern. But the words felt hollow, and even the audience could sense it. Many guests had already heard the rumors and knew something was different. The gala's charm, once so effortless, seemed forced and fragile. Danielle, from her home that evening, followed news updates online. She watched as headlines hinted at the gala's struggles. Some articles mentioned the missing donations. Some hinted at the shifting support of the Carters. The news painted the gala as an organization struggling with change, unprepared for a world where exclusivity and discrimination could no longer be ignored. Danielle felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She didn't enjoy seeing people fail, but she knew the outcome was inevitable. The gala had made its choice, and now it had to face the consequences. Across the city, Marcus and Danielle's presence in other charities became a quiet symbol of integrity. Children's hospitals sent notes of gratitude, schools celebrated, new programs funded by their support, and local nonprofits welcomed them as partners in change. The contrast between their genuine impact and the gala's shallow spectacle could not have been clearer. People began comparing the two worlds. The gala's reputation suffered quietly but steadily. Eleanor attempted to reach out to Danielle, sending polite invitations and notes of apology, but Danielle did not respond. She had learned the power of silence. Every unanswered message, every ignored call, served as a reminder that respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned. Eleanor's attempts only highlighted her desperation. Meanwhile, the gala's board members began holding meetings in private. They debated how to recover from the sudden loss of influence. Some suggested drastic measures, like personally calling Marcus and Danielle, or even giving them public recognition. But the Carters had already moved beyond the gala. They were no longer waiting for validation from the people who had tried to erase Danielle. They had found a space where their contributions mattered, where their presence was valued, and where their efforts made real change. The story of Danielle being erased began to spread more widely. Journalists investigated, speaking with other donors who had witnessed the slight and heard Eleanor's reasoning. The truth emerged. Danielle's name had been removed deliberately, not by mistake, and the gala's focus on image over substance had alienated its most valuable supporters. Social media buzzed with discussions about inclusivity, respect, the power of standing up against subtle forms of discrimination. Danielle's story became a quiet inspiration to many. Despite the pressure on Eleanor and the gala, Danielle never gloated. She continued her work, attended events where she was genuinely welcomed, and quietly watched the ripple effect of her and Marcus's choices. She had realized that dignity was more important than revenge. The Carters' absence from the gala had done more damage than any confrontation ever could have. People noticed, respected, and followed their lead. As the night of the gala progressed, Eleanor's anxiety grew. Every empty chair, every missing donation, every whispered comment reminded her of the choice she had made. She had underestimated Danielle and Marcus, thinking that wealth and power alone could maintain control. But respect, integrity, and quiet. Influence had proven far more powerful than arrogance and exclusion by the end of the evening. The gala organizers understood that their world had changed. The era of treating people as optional based on image or prejudice was over. Marcus and Danielle's actions had sent a clear message. Dignity and respect could not be ignored, and those who tried to erase others would eventually face the consequences. In the weeks that followed, the gala struggled to regain its footing. Sponsors demanded accountability. Donors questioned leadership. The organization realized it had to rethink everything from its guest lists to its values if it hoped to remain relevant. Meanwhile, Danielle and Marcus continued their work, quietly supporting causes that truly mattered, their influence stronger than ever. Danielle looked back on that night with a sense of calm. The humiliation of being erased had been transformed into a quiet victory. She had not needed to confront anyone publicly, nor had she needed to fight with anger. Through dignity, patience, and strategic choices, she had reclaimed her respect and inspired others. Marcus, always at her side, had been her shield and her partner. Together, they had turned a moment of pain into a lesson for others. Danielle knew that, from that night forward, her presence, her voice, and her contributions would never again be dismissed. The gala had tried to erase her, but instead, they had unintentionally shown the world the power and impact of a woman who refused to be invisible. After the gala debacle, life began to settle into a new rhythm for Danielle and Marcus. The city had noticed their absence, and whispers of the previous year's slight still lingered in social circles. But Danielle no longer felt the hurt in the same way. She had spent months redirecting her energy toward causes that truly mattered, and in doing so, she discovered something powerful. She did not need validation from people who had tried to erase her. Respect, she realized, was earned through action. It's not given by invitation. Marcus continued to support her quietly but firmly. Together, they had become a force for change. Not just in the charities they supported, but in the very way philanthropy was being viewed in the city. Instead of attending events that valued image over substance, they had chosen organizations that honored inclusion, transparency, and genuine impact. Hospitals, schools, local nonprofit programs, all of them thrived under their guidance. Danielle became more than a supporter. She became a leader, someone whose voice mattered, someone whose work inspired others. Meanwhile, the gala itself began to struggle. Without the Carters' involvement, both in terms of funding and influence, the event started losing its sheen. Sponsors withdrew, some citing the need for alignment with donors who valued respect and inclusivity. The board members tried desperately to patch things together, but the absence of Danielle and Marcus was too significant to ignore. The gala had always relied on appearances, and now appearances alone could not sustain it. Eleanor Grant, the organizer who had erased Danielle's name, found herself facing consequences she had never anticipated. Her attempts to smooth things over with polite notes and forced apologies went ignored. Donors began questioning her judgment. Some board members who had been silent before now voiced their concern over her decisions, and murmurs of dissatisfaction spread throughout the organization. Eleanor realized too late that power built on exclusion and image alone was fragile. The very choice she thought would protect the gala had nearly destroyed it. Danielle, however, never sought revenge. She did not relish the gala's struggles. Instead, she focused on building her own path. She visited hospitals and schools regularly, helped organize events that brought real resources to people in need, and became a mentor to other women who had experienced exclusion or discrimination. Every time she spoke to a group, she reminded herself and others of an important truth. Dignity and action mattered far more than validation from those who sought to diminish you. Marcus watched Danielle with pride. He had seen her hurt that first night when her name was missing, and he had seen her transform that pain into determination. They had acted together, quietly but decisively, to show that respect was not optional. Marcus, though a billionaire, understood that his power was best used to uplift others, and Danielle became the face of that truth. Over the months, news outlets began highlighting the story. Journalists wrote articles about how Danielle had been erased, how she and Marcus had shifted their support to organizations that valued substance over appearances, and how the gala had suffered as a result. Social media buzzed with discussions about inclusion, equity, and the power of standing up without shouting. Danielle became a symbol not for anger, but for resilience, intelligence, and quiet authority. One afternoon, Danielle received an invitation from a newly established charity, It was small, community-based, and focused on education in underprivileged neighborhoods. Unlike the gala, there were no grand chandeliers, no red carpets, no attempts at creating an image. What it offered was respect and the chance to make a real difference. She smiled as she read it. This was exactly the kind of work that mattered to her. Marcus, watching her, nodded approvingly. "This is where you belong," he said. "Where your work actually counts, and where people will never try to erase you." Danielle felt a deep sense of peace. She realized that the humiliation she had suffered had not destroyed her. It had clarified her priorities. She no longer needed to attend events for status. She no longer needed to prove herself to people who didn't see her worth. Her focus was on action, on meaningful change, and on supporting others who might not yet have a voice. The gala, on the other hand, continued to falter. Without the Carters' presence, it struggled to attract influential donors. Some of the organizers tried to mend fences, reaching out to Danielle with apologies, but she politely declined. She did not need their approval or their validation. They had had their chance, and they had lost it through their own arrogance. Every empty seat at their event was a reminder that actions mattered more than appearances. Danielle also began speaking at conferences, sharing her experiences in philanthropy and social justice, about being erased, about how subtle discrimination could impact even the most influential people, and about how dignity and integrity were the most powerful tools anyone could possess. Audiences were captivated by her story not because she was rich or married to Marcus, but because she had faced exclusion with grace and had turned it into action. Marcus quietly ensured that her work reached as many people as possible. He leveraged his influence, not for attention, but to amplify the causes Danielle believed in. Together, they created scholarships, funded new community programs, and supported hospitals that needed urgent help. The results were tangible. Children received better health care, schools gained resources for education, and communities that had been overlooked began to thrive. Eleanor, watching from the sidelines, finally realized the full impact of her decisions. Her attempts to control appearances had backfired. She had underestimated the Carters' integrity and underestimated Danielle's strength. The gala still existed, but its reputation had shifted. People remembered the story of Danielle being erased. And the lesson was clear: exclusion has consequences, and true respect cannot be fabricated. For Danielle, the journey was transformative. She understood that her worth had never been tied to an invitation or a list. Her contributions, her voice, and her dedication defined her. She had been tested by humiliation and discrimination, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more respected than ever. One evening, sitting on their terrace, overlooking the city, Marcus turned to her. "Do you realize what you've accomplished?" he asked. Danielle smiled softly. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "And I didn't do it to prove anything to them. I did it because it was right." Marcus took her hand. "And in doing so, you've changed the game for everyone. You've shown that respect, dignity, and action are stronger than exclusion." Danielle leaned against him, watching the city lights twinkle below. She thought about the gala, the whispers, and the moments of humiliation. But instead of anger or regret, she felt calm. They had turned a moment of exclusion into a story of empowerment. They had demonstrated that wealth and influence, when combined with integrity and partnership, could make a real difference. In the months and years that followed, Danielle continued to lead quietly but powerfully. She built programs that mattered, supported women and children, and showed the city that true influence comes from respect, not from a name on a list. Marcus remained at her side, her partner in life and in purpose, quietly amplifying her impact. And for those who had once tried to erase her, the lesson was impossible to ignore. Danielle Carter was no longer invisible. She had turned exclusion into empowerment, humiliation into action, and erasure into legacy. The world had noticed, and in doing so, it had learned that respect cannot be taken lightly. By the end of it all, Danielle's story became an example for others, a story of resilience, strategy, and quiet strength. She had been tested, overlooked, and erased, but she had emerged not only intact, but stronger, wiser, and more influential than ever. Her name, once missing from a card, was now remembered for the difference she made, the lives she touched, and the dignity she embodied.